Have you ever wondered how shifts in global politics influence a nation's foreign policy? Today we delve into the evolution of India's foreign policy, particularly its recent shift toward China and Russia and its growing distance from the West. India's foreign policy has always been a fascinating study in pragmatism and idealism, a dance between its historical non-alignment stance and the realities of a world increasingly divided along geopolitical lines. Rooted in the post-colonial era, India's initial foreign policy was influenced by the ideal of non-alignment, a principle that sought to maintain a neutral stance during the Cold War, avoiding entanglement in the power play between the United States and the Soviet Union. Over time, however, the realities of economic interests, security concerns, and regional dynamics started to reshape India's approach. The formation of BRICS, a grouping of emerging economies that includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, marked a significant shift in India's foreign policy. This move indicated India's willingness to engage more closely with China and Russia, despite historical tensions, particularly over border disputes with China. On the other hand, India's relationship with the West, especially with the United States, has been a complex one. While the two have shared democratic values and increasing economic ties, differences over issues like trade, climate change, and intellectual property rights have often strained the relationship. In recent years, we've seen India's foreign policy take an interesting turn. The traditional non-alignment stance has been subtly replaced by a more pragmatic approach, one that seeks to balance India's relationship with major powers while promoting its own strategic interests. This shift has been particularly noticeable in India's dealings with China and Russia, with whom it has sought closer ties despite historical and geopolitical differences. Yet this shift has not been without its challenges, as India navigates the complex landscape of global politics. It must contend with a host of issues ranging from border disputes with China to its relationship with the West and the implications of its growing ties with Russia. As the world order has evolved, so too has India's foreign policy. Its recent shifts are both a response to and a shaper of the changing geopolitical landscape. In recent years, India's foreign policy has notably turned toward China and Russia. But what factors have driven this shift? A combination of economic opportunities, strategic considerations, and shared interests have propelled this pivot. For India, the economic incentives are clear. China is one of India's largest trading partners, offering a vast market for Indian goods, while Russia provides critical energy resources to fuel India's burgeoning economy. Beyond mere economics, strategic considerations also factor into this realignment. In a world increasingly defined by great power competition, India's turn towards China and Russia serves as a counterweight to Western influence. With the rise of BRICS, an association of 5 major emerging economies that includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, India finds itself in a group that collectively challenges the Western-dominated global order. More recently, global events have further incentivized India's pivot. The Russia-Ukraine war has underscored the importance of strategic partnerships. India's stance, notably different from that of many Western nations, reflects its unique geopolitical considerations and its commitment to a foreign policy that prioritizes sovereignty and non-interference. Moreover, initiatives such as the proposed BRICS currency launch, aimed at reducing dependence on the US dollar, underline the desire of these nations to create a multipolar world where power is more evenly distributed. The shift is also evident in defense cooperation. India has traditionally relied on Russia for its military hardware. Even as it seeks to diversify its defense partnerships, the relationship with Russia remains crucial for India's military modernization efforts. Similarly, with China, despite border disputes and competition, there's an understanding that cooperation is beneficial for regional stability. This pragmatism has led to diplomatic alignment at international forums on issues like climate change and global governance. Thus, India's turn toward China and Russia represents a significant realignment of its foreign policy, driven by both opportunities and challenges in the global arena. While India is moving closer to China and Russia, it seems to be growing more distant from the West. Let's explore why. This distancing from the West is not a sudden jolt but a gradual drift, influenced by a medley of strategic, ideological, and practical factors. At the heart of this shift are diverging strategic interests. For instance, the growing alignment with Israel, a key Western ally, signals a shift in India's historical stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Despite India's long-standing support for the Palestinian cause, the current Indian government has expressed solidarity with Israel, abstaining from a UN vote calling for a ceasefire in Gaza. The reasons behind this are multifaceted, appealing to India's domestic political climate while also reflecting its evolving international orientation. Moreover, disagreements over values and norms have also contributed to the growing chasm. The West's emphasis on human rights and democratic norms often clashes with India's internal policies. For example, the enforced silence in Kashmir, viewed by some as a violation of freedom of expression and religious duty, has been met with international criticism. Yet, India's stance remains firm, further widening the gulf with the West. The West's policies toward China and Russia also play a role in shaping India's foreign policy. The increasing polarization between the West and these two nations has compelled India to make strategic choices. The West's aggressive stance toward China, for instance, has pushed India closer to China, as they find common ground in resisting Western dominance. Lastly, practical considerations, such as economic and defense partnerships, cannot be overlooked. India's recent alignment with Russia, despite the latter's strained relations with the West, is a case in point. The purchase of military hardware from nations other than Russia, like France and India, by Armenia, a Russian ally, is indicative of the shifting alliances in the geopolitical landscape. The growing distance between India and the West is a complex phenomenon shaped by a mix of strategic, ideological, and practical factors. As we delve deeper into this evolving dynamic, it's crucial to remember that no foreign policy is set in stone. Instead, it's a fluid entity, constantly adapting to shifting geopolitical realities. India's foreign policy shifts have significant implications for global politics. Let's delve into what these might be. As India pivots towards China and Russia, the balance of power on the global stage is poised to undergo a transformation. India, with its burgeoning economy and strategic geopolitical location, could potentially tip the scales in favor of an Eastern axis of power. This tilt could challenge the existing Western-dominated geopolitical order, leading to a multipolar world where power is more evenly distributed. The impact of India's shift on international institutions should not be underestimated either. India's new alliances might influence its voting patterns in organizations like the United Nations, potentially disrupting long-standing Western consensus on key global issues. Moreover, India's growing alignment with the BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, could breathe new life into the bloc, strengthening its role as a counterweight to Western economic dominance. Regionally, India's policy shifts could have far-reaching effects. In the Middle East, India's closer alignment with Israel, as evidenced by its abstention from a UN vote on the Israel-Gaza conflict, might strain its relations with traditional allies in the Arab world. On the other hand, its strengthened ties with China and Russia could help it navigate the complex politics of the Asia-Pacific region, where territorial disputes and trade wars are commonplace. India's relationships with other countries are also likely to evolve. Its growing distance from the West might strain ties with traditional allies like the United States and the European Union. However, it could also open up new avenues for cooperation with countries that have historically been outside its sphere of influence. India's role in global affairs is changing. As it asserts itself more prominently on the world stage, it's likely to take on a more active role in shaping global norms and policies. Whether it's in climate change negotiations, global health initiatives, or international peacekeeping operations, India's voice is set to become more influential. As India repositions itself in the world, the ripple effects will be felt far and wide, reshaping the contours of global politics. So where is India's foreign policy headed, and what might this mean for the world? India's foreign policy appears to be at a crossroads, with significant shifts visible in its global alignments. The nation's historical stance, often characterized by non-alignment and strategic autonomy, seems to be evolving in response to changing geopolitical realities. One major trend is India's apparent pivot towards China and Russia. This shift is driven by a complex interplay of factors, including economic considerations, regional security dynamics, and domestic political calculations. For instance, India's exploration of the possibility of launching a BRICS currency as an alternative to the US dollar signals its intent to forge new economic alliances and reduce dependence on the West. Simultaneously, India's foreign policy is showing signs of distancing from the West, particularly in the aftermath of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. This is evident in India's actions such as stopping wheat exports amidst the war and its oil diplomacy maneuvers. However, the future of India's foreign policy is not set in stone. It will be shaped by a host of factors, including domestic political changes, global economic trends, and emerging security challenges. For instance, the growing influence of China in the Indo-Pacific region, the evolving global balance of power, and the impact of climate change on India's security could all shape the trajectory of India's foreign policy. In terms of global implications, India's foreign policy choices could potentially reshape the world order. If India continues to strengthen its ties with Russia and China, it could lead to a realignment of global alliances and power structures. On the other hand, if India chooses to maintain its strategic autonomy and balance its relations with different power centers, it could play a key role in promoting a multipolar world. The future of India's foreign policy is a fascinating topic, full of uncertainty and potential. As India navigates this complex landscape, its choices will have profound impacts on the global stage.